Pygmalion. Act 3. 1. What was the bet? Professor Higgins bet with Pickering that he would be able to make Liza a lady in 6 months. 2. What was Mrs. Higgins? What was she doing? She was Higgins' mother. She was writing letters in the drawing room. 3. Why was she angry with Higgins? Because this was her at-home day when she used to receive her own guests, and she didn't like Higgins to come as he scares her guests off. 4. Why did Higgins come on that day? He said that he was coming to the house to try out Liza's accent. 5. Describe the flower girl at Mrs. Higgins' house. She was beautifully dressed and she made quite an impression. She was so beautiful that Freddie fell in love with her. 6. What did Professor Higgins teach Liza to say at that time? He warned her to limit her conversation to the weather and to people's health only, as he knew that she might be discovered if she spoke in any other subject. 7. What did Liza speak about? She spoke about an aunt of hers who was supposed to have died of flu, but was perhaps killed so that the killer might steal her new straw hat. 8. Well, you never fall in love with any woman under 45. Comment. This was said by Mrs. Higgins to Professor Higgins. She wanted him to love and marry as he hated women, and didn't think of marry at all. 9. Some habits are too deep to be changed. Comment. This was said by Professor Higgins to his mother. This clarifies how he doesn't like women and his refusal for the idea of marriage. He is the type of man who doesn't marry. 10. What did the Ainsford Hills think about her language? They thought that she was using a new fashionable type of slang, everyday English. 11. What did Higgins criticize? He criticizes the company, including himself, for having no knowledge of science, philosophy or poetry. 12. Walk. Not bloody likely. This was said by Liza to Freddie when he asked her if she would walk across the park. She said that she would take a taxi. She wanted to say that she was a lady who used to get on a taxi, not just walk. 13. How did Pickering try to defend Liza? Pickering tried to defend her by saying that he could no longer distinguish high society from ordinary people as most people. Summary. A few months later, Higgins's mother, Mrs. Higgins, is writing letters in her drawing room when she is interrupted by her son. She scolds him for turning up during her at-home day, the day when she receives guests. Mrs. Higgins claims that her son scares off her guests. Higgins explains his bet with Pickering over Eliza and says that she is coming to the house to try out her accent. Mrs. and Miss Ainsford Hill, the mother and the daughter, appear. Higgins recognizes them, but he cannot remember exactly where he has seen them before. Freddie also arrives. Miss Ainsford tries to flirt with Mr. Higgins, but he criticizes the company, including himself, for having no knowledge of science, philosophy or poetry. Eliza appears, beautifully dressed, and she makes quite an impression. In fact, Freddie falls in love with her. Mr. Higgins realizes that they all met on that day, but nobody else noticed the connection. Eliza, who has been warned to limit her conversation to the weather and to people's health, talks about an aunt of hers who is supposed to have died of flu, but was perhaps killed so that the killer might steal her new straw hat. Mr. Higgins becomes worried and Eliza leaves, but the Ainsford Hills think that she is using a new, fashionable type of slang, everyday English. Pickering tries to support that thought by saying that he can no longer distinguish high society from ordinary people, as most people swear so often these days. Mrs. Higgins invites Freddie back to spend more time with Eliza. The Ainsford Hills exit. Mrs. Higgins scolds the men and says that their project cannot work because no skill in pronunciation or fancy dresses can change the subject matter of what Eliza talks about. She also disapproves of the fact that Eliza lives in the house with two men. Moreover, she complains that Pickering and Higgins are treating her like a doll. The men protest that they treat Eliza very seriously and are quite taken with her talents, including the fact that she has a wonderful ear and has taught herself to play the piano. Mrs. Higgins reminds them of the problem they have not yet faced: what to do with Eliza after the experiment is over, and the men reply that they will set her up in some sort of genteel occupation. They exit, talking about Eliza. Mrs. Higgins resumes writing letters and exclaims with the word "men" with anger.